Another Race to World First is in the books, even somewhat in ways surpassing the last one, but the story of this one, however you want to title it, is either the Race to World First that was awful until it wasn't, or the Race to World First that proved that there is a lot of change that Blizzard can make on the back end very, very quickly if they have a little bit of time, and is that a good thing? I think that's where we're going to get stuck a little bit as we get into this, is certain decisions they made were really bad for the race, but had a major payoff at the end. Does that mean it works? Kind of? Or is that just luck and they can do it anyway? Let's find out, shall we? So this Race to World First started similar to the War Within. The start of a new expansion comes with Heroic Week and Early Access and all those kinds of things that Blizzard now has. Is if you buy the game early, you get to go in and start playing before everybody else and leveling characters. In the War Within, this seemingly, at that point, got absurd for the Race to World First guilds by making like 13 alts. 13 alts to run endless amounts of split runs. A very basic understanding, if you're not sure what that is. They basically duplicate their characters 10, 11 times. Sometimes they throw in an alternative class, you know, so you might have 10 warriors and maybe 3 or 4 death knights. And the idea is you just run the heroic raid over and over and over and over again using all these alts. You do tons and tons of heroic runs. You even bring in outside helpers who are not going to loot anything. And the idea is you should come out of that period of time with like 3 or 4 characters that had a god run. That's what you're looking for. The dice all rolled in your favor and you essentially got every item off every boss that you could possibly get. Meaning what would take an ordinary person weeks to collect that heroic gear by running the raid every week, they condense that down to just 1 week, and in many cases they have that done 3 or 4 times per player. So that person with those 10 warriors might have 3 or even 4 BIS heroic geared warriors. Now it couldn't get more absurd than that, right? Well, it did. First signs of this happening was certainly with people starting to go past the 13 barrier. Then we started to see 17 characters. 20 characters per player, and then some players went further than that. Every guild, I think, had a bare minimum. I think Echo's was 20, and obviously I have more Echo knowledge, considering I casted for them for the Race to World First. And then some of those players went even further. Mirez, I think, ended up with 31 or 32 tanks of various classes, all of them available, and that would come in handy later on. And then Heroic Week began after the early access. The raid was released. We had normal and heroic. Now, the important thing here is we only had 2 of the 3 raids releasing. They staggered the raid release. So we got Void Spire and Dream Rift on heroic. Then at the end of that reset, we got Void Spire and Dream Rift Mythic. But we didn't have any of the 3rd raid, March of Keldon. We didn't have it in normal, LFR, heroic, or mythic. And at the end of the reset where we had Mythic, Void Spire, and Dream Rift, we were going to get all of March of Keldon. Every version of March of Keldon would come out. I did an interview with Paul Cubitt, who is the director of Midnight, and he pointed out that this was for story reasons, which we now know is true. It was the big return of Sylvanas, and they wanted to hold that back. But that obviously created problems for the raid. At the beginning of the Echo broadcast, when I got there, I arrived. I did not go for the Heroic Week. They did stream that, and they had some casters on site. I wasn't there for that. I arrived at the weekend before Mythic released. We put together a timeline of how this was going to go. For a long time leading up to this Race to World First, it was really in flux as to whether there would be an event at all. Because there were so many variables when they just said, we're going to stagger the raid release, of how that was going to look. Blizzard finally confirmed it would be Mythic, Void, Spire, and Dream Rift, and then March of Keldon would come out, and an event was confirmed, because that can work. But it had multiple timelines. What if Illyria, which is the end of the Void Spire, was super easy? What happens then? Don't know. Do they do Mythic splits? What if Illyria is super hard, and then we end up in a timeline where it hits the next reset, March of Keldon releases, and we end up with a weird scenario where Bellerin is easier than Illyria, and so you kill Bellerin, and then you go back to Illyria, but you've already progged Illyria. It was all a bit of a mess, and we had no idea, going into this Race to World First, what would happen. The best timeline, as we figured it, would be that Illyria would lead up to the reset, probably die just before, and then leads us smoothly into March of Keldon. So essentially, although the raids were staggered, it would be one smooth, continuous raid tier as we're normally used to. And as we all know, That didn't happen. Or maybe you don't know, and that's why you're here. So this was a real mystery. So Heroic Week goes ahead. I think the guilds did something like 25 to 26 heroic splits that week. They had tons of characters. And then Mythic comes out. We have the reset. Obviously releases early in NA. So we get to see, like in EU, we get to see what's hard, what's not. Unsurprisingly, splits are done again. So ultimately, I know Echo did something like 56 heroic splits total, because there are some bits missing and you want more characters available. And then we start going into Mythic. And this is where problems start to occur. Unsurprisingly, one of the big questions going into this was Mythic Chimeras, the one boss that's in the Dream Rift. Mythic Chimeras not only drops tier, which is very important, it's the tier chest, but also an extraordinarily powerful trinket. At least it was at the time. It got changed a lot over the course of the race, but was still very good. Gaze of the Alnseer. This is a very, very, very good trinket for a lot of people, right? Practically everybody wants this trinket. So going into it, the question was, with different raids, you don't have to subscribe to the idea that your character, once it enters a mythic raid and kills a boss, it is now locked to that mythic raid, right? So once you kill a boss in a mythic raid, you are locked to that version of the raid. You can't take your character that killed one boss in mythic, go in the Void Spire, for example, then join a different Void Spire and go through that again. You can't do that. That's not the way it works. You are tied and locked to that instance. With separate instances, the Void Spire and the Dream Rift, characters you lock to the Dream Rift are not locked to the Void Spire. What that means, mythic splits. And we all expected this. That means you can, depending on how difficult the Dream Rift is, Chimeras is, you could do that dungeon a lot. You can do that a lot of times with just a couple of characters that you want to get loot. So you're essentially doing split runs again. And a bunch of characters who don't want loot. And you can use all these heroic characters that you've geared up just to farm that for one or two people. So you're hoping for trinkets to drop. So if hopefully 2 trinkets drop, 2 of those players get the mythic trinket. You do that a bunch of times. You might end up with a bunch of trinkets. Then those people can all come together. You've all got the trinket and go into the Void Spire. And they can have a very, very powerful raid in there. So unsurprisingly, Chimeras did start to die a lot. I think 7 to 9 times the guilds killed Chimeras in week 1. Something along those lines. Numbers will be off depending on the guild. Method was also doing the same thing. And then it was time for Void Spire. And something really interesting happened. And I'm really glad I went on the Poddy C with Draknos and Dorky in the middle of this whole fiesta that we're about to get into. Because they clarified a couple of things for me that happened over there. Because obviously it happens while we're asleep, generally, NA stuff. And then we sort of get information fed back to us as best we can, based on what people may have seen during the night or what they heard, blah, blah, blah. So Liquid goes into the Void Spire and destroys it. Absolutely wrecks it. So interesting point here. People were a little nervous at this point. However, this is not unusual, right? If we take a normal raid tier of 9 to 11 bosses or wherever it is, very normal for the Race to World First guilds to annihilate 3/4 plus of that raid. Very, very normal. And for good reason. They're wearing, as we just said, weeks upon weeks of heroic gear on those characters. They are very, very geared out. Way more than your average Mythic guild is going to be. They should, in theory, overwhelm it. They're going to kill the bosses faster. They're going to have more stamina. They're going to have more healing. They're going to be able to skip various parts of fights that other guilds are going to have to deal with. They should generally annihilate these bosses because they're way overgeared for them. And in the Race to World First, what you're kind of hoping for is that, yes, they're going to one-shot everything else. That's usually a good sign for me. That means every other Mythic guild should have some decent linear progression curve for them to enjoy, and the race isn't interfering with them. And then at the very tail end, when it's getting harder, then you're going to start seeing what we'll call super bosses, which are designed just for the Race to World First, and that's okay because nobody else in the world is going to be touching them in that version, and it's totally fine. They're so far ahead that nobody else could catch them in any way, and they can then do super hard bosses that are really fun for the race and really interesting to watch and are an engaging experience. That's what we hope for. But the Void Spire is dying really quickly. One of the predictions most of us had that was Mythic Dragons, the Twin Dragons, was going to be the first wall, that we'll call it. This is the first boss that's actually going to challenge the Race to World First guilds, because at least on Heroic, it was a very tough boss. In fact, it's arguably the hardest boss in Heroic for the guilds to kill, so the Mythic version is probably going to be way harder. It was not. It was not. And Blizzard recognized this. And here's where it gets really interesting for me in this Race to World First. Blizzard pushes a very haphazard, quick hotfix to both the Vanguard, the Paladin fight that comes after the Dragons, and to Crown of the Cosmos, which is the Illyria fight. Now, I say haphazard because they clearly had to rush this out as fast as possible, because a number of things have become very apparent that Blizzard probably wasn't as expecting to be as bad as it was, namely add-ons. Add-ons play a big feature in the story of this race. The add-on thing is that Blizzard tried to eliminate all sort of computational logistic add-ons from the game. So you can have visual stuff, that's totally fine, your UI should be the same, but when it comes to encounters, you shouldn't have access to a bunch of computational things. So add-ons that are working things out for you. And Blizzard worked quite hard to make this happen, but it didn't work. Not in the we got everything sense, right? They managed to eliminate all avenues for these add-ons to work. It didn't work. And that became very, very apparent very early in the Void Spire and in Heroic, when we started to see add-ons pop up that were kind of on the border of what Blizzard was trying to get rid of. Now, the cool thing here is that Blizzard was in contact with the Race to World First guilds, and the Race to World First guilds were very open about what they could do, and were asking Blizzard if they could do it, because the last thing these guilds want is to build an add-on, show it during the Race to World First, and then get banned for exploiting, or Blizzard being unhappy with it and causing some sort of punishment states to occur. So they were in contact with Blizzard saying, hey, we have this. Sometimes Blizzard said, no, we're aware you can do it. Thank you for showing us, but don't do that. You know, we will consider that too far. Other times, Blizzard was like maybe reluctant, but said, okay, we can't really stop you doing this. It's not technically breaking our idea here, our philosophy on this thing, so you can go ahead and do it. The way I had this described to me by one of the Echo technicians, who is very heavily involved in this, is there's an add-on that does a certain thing. He knows, because of his wealth of knowledge of how to create these things, 4 ways of making that work, right? There are 4 different paths that make this add-on work. Blizzard fixed 3 of them, but there was 1 still available to them. And the way I tried to describe it to the audience that was watching is essentially Blizzard has replumbed the game, right? There's new pipework for all the water of how the game works. There's new plumbing in. But now the Race to World First is forcing actual water down it, and we're starting to see leaks. Like, there's some leaks that need repairing, and I do believe that a lot of stuff we saw during this tier will be fixed in the next tiers, because otherwise Blizzard hasn't achieved its goals, essentially. So that will happen, but for now, those leaks are there, and Blizzard needs time to fix them. That's how I look at it. And you might wonder, well, how can that happen? There is nobody in the world trying to circumnavigate or break Blizzard's intentions more than the Race to World First. Certainly when it comes to add-on tech that'll give them the advantage to win. These are the guys you want testing it. That's not a negative thing, if anybody's feeling that way. That's not the case. What you want is the real whiz kids to try and find where these leaks are, and they did. So Blizzard recognized that. A big question that came up is like, how are you supposed to do? So a simple example would be the Paladins, which went from 4 dispels to 8. 8 dispels is really hard to do without some sort of add-on coordination. And after they saw this, a lot of people who were trying to keep up with the race were like, how are you supposed to do this without add-ons? And the answer is, you weren't. But they did have those add-ons. Blizzard knew that. So the hotfix came in, which included the idea that they had this add-on technology. That's my theory on it. I don't have confirmation on that, but that makes sense, right? The original version had 4 dispels, which is very easily manageable by 4 healers without the use of add-ons. The hotfix that came into the Paladins had 8, which now is more difficult, because now you've got to coordinate imp dispels, maybe bring revivals, which was a big thing, or you've got to find other ways of dispelling certain people in a certain amount of time or they die. So that requires some level of coordination and things like that going on. So that fits the puzzle piece. Is they started to hotfix based on the fact that the guilds did have add-ons, originally not. Which is why I was not angry at the encounter designers for how the Void Spire and Chimeras ended up. They probably were designing these bosses that in the world where there was none of these add-ons in existence. That's how they built them. You're only going to have the Blizzard boss timers. That's it. And so you have to play with that. And that wasn't the case. The reality was different, so they had to change how things were approached. Even given that, The Vanguard became a much, much tougher boss, more than anybody expected, but still fell relatively easily in the around 100 pull mark. And then they got to Illyria. Fun story for Illyria. Illyria didn't last. I think it was 50 pulls, 56, something like that for Liquid, which is not a lot for the quote-unquote end boss, and we'll come to that in a second. And 21 for Echo. Like, Echo wrecked it because they'd seen how Liquid had done it, and it was super easy to reenact, so they just murdered Illyria into the floor, which was very disappointing. The day that happened, actually, I was doing the morning shift of casting for Echo. I came in. JB was in because he raids through the night because he's North American. He's another caster, J.B. And I put on the screen, like, there's the raid. I was like, oh, they're doing Illyria. Let's see what it's like. JB says, it looks pretty easy. He was raiding, was like, it looks pretty easy. And then I saw that they were about to kill it as the Echo Raiders were arriving. And it was Gigi who came in to say hi and good morning and stuff like he does. And he said, how's it looking? I said, they're about to kill Illyria. And he said, there's no way. I was like, yeah, she's about to die, dude. And he's like, oh. Okay. But thankfully, that's not the end of the race. We still have March of Keldon, right? But unusual, to say the least. And Illyria did fall. Illyria fell. And then we ended up in this weird period of time where there was no bosses to fight. They were all dead for 4 days. 4 days remaining of the reset, and there's nothing for the guilds to fight. Now, on the face of it, and as it statistically showed with viewership and interest and feedback on the race, this was not a good thing. People look forward to the race as part of their calendar, right? Even people who played World of Warcraft a long time ago and have no time for it anymore, you know, no time for MMOs or anything like that. They know enough about World of Warcraft because they played during Classic, Vanilla, Wrath of Lich King, whatever, to come to the race and enjoy the hell out of it. They can watch it at work and things like that. So we have a lot of passerby viewers, I guess, which goes into the hundreds of thousands as it did this one, who just want to watch the race and enjoy it, right? Like a football match, like a World Cup and things like that. And it's now, in terms of streaming the Race to World First, we're in the second week, midway through the second week, because they did stream Heroic, at least on the Echo side, and there's still nothing interesting happening. That's really bad, right? And the feedback everywhere was, this is the worst thing I've ever seen. Blizzard's goofed up. The Staggered raid release is terrible. It's awful. And as a caster, I have to agree. And as a fan of the Race to World First primarily, I have to agree. It was miserable. Really miserable to be just like, okay, what do we do now? And the guilds did what they should do. They decided to do split runs of Mythic, which is unheard of. Like, we have seen at the very end of the reset them go in on some alts and kill a couple of the easier free bosses like we talked about earlier. But to basically do everything, besides, they didn't do Paladins and Illyria, basically because of Paladins, it required quite a specific setup. They just re-killed the Void Spire over and over again. And it was really boring and sad and loser and sucks. It was the worst thing ever. And very quickly, the race was being labeled the worst Race to World First of all time. However, that is, as I said to many people, I hope this is the middle of the story and not the end of the story. And that turned out to be true, thankfully. Blizzard did have an ace up their sleeves. And that was, unlike normally, where the guilds are in the middle of the raid and they have to start very quickly pushing hotfixes, which they think are going to do a good job, like they did with Paladins and Illyria. They had 4 days where nobody can enter the March of Keldon at all, which means they're under no pressure, they're under no stress whatsoever. They can take their time and really consider how to make the March of Keldon perfect, up to like Dimensius and Surek Farak terms, right? A really, really good thing. Not only that, and I believe Liquid did the same, was contact Blizzard and tell them we're going to have this item level. We're just letting you know. With our gearing system, we're going to have something like 279 item level going in, which is absurd, by the way. I don't know when you're watching this video, but to give you context, that's as if they farmed the Mythic raid for weeks. For weeks at that point. That is a ludicrous. There's not even much more to get after that. There is stuff after reset, but not a great deal. And then came one of the most interesting strategic choices that the guilds diverted on. Usually it's pretty similar. You do splits, you do as much as you can, you go in with your strongest team, you try and hold the Vantus rune, and then reset comes, you do the splits again, to get more gear, then you re-clear to get more gear, and then you move forward. It's a very standard sort of road that happens because it's the most logical and tried and tested method of doing things. Echo did not do that. Echo instead decided to spend, I think, 3 days doing math. And the math was all to figure out how to create the most monstrously absurd characters on the reset as quickly as possible so that they wouldn't have to do any splits, meaning they could go into March of Keldon way, way faster than Liquid would. Way, way faster. And this involved so much work with going through each of their very well-geared characters, figuring out what they could get this week by doing mythic reclears, looking at every quest in the game that involved something involved in giving you crests, how to get stupidly high items that they characters didn't even really want onto those characters that were then going to be burned. Now, what I mean by that is there's an achievement in the game called Hero of the Dawn, I believe it's what it's called. And if you get this achievement, it reduces the cost of upgrading your gear on your account. So what Echo essentially tried to do was take a character, give that character that you're not going to play as much item level as possible, and then that character is going to spend every crest it possibly has upgrading this goofy, dumb character so it gets the achievement. And then that character goes in the bin because you're going to then use all the resources you've been collecting on your main character to be able to upgrade that stupidly high for half the price, which means you can just upgrade way more gear, right? Because it's going to cost you half as much. Anybody who's played World of Warcraft will know that you might upgrade 1 or 2 items with crests and then you run out of crests and there's actually no more to get because there's a limit on how many you can get. By doing this system, they could burn one character, and then this character could upgrade twice as much gear because it costs half the price, and get a bunch more stuff out of it. That was the idea, and that's what they did. It was an extremely technical process. They were up all night figuring out how to make this work, and it did pay off for them. Kind of. My theory with this kind of stuff is that if Echo knows it, Liquid knows it, because they're both extraordinarily good. And my prediction was, when I was hearing all this being mapped out, and there's this with doing like a housing thing, and there's this with doing this, is like, you guys will end up the same item level. I guarantee it, you will end up the same item level. And they did. They did. However, it did give Echo a significant leg up going into the reset. Liquid followed sort of standard procedure, which had some advantages for them. Of going into splits on the reset, getting as much gear as possible, then going into Mythic Bellerin, which is the March of Keldon is now released, and finding out that that thing had turned from a pushover in testing, an absolute joke boss, into an extraordinarily hard boss. To give you context for anybody watching this in the future, the first boss of the 2 in March of Keldon alone took more than, I think, twice the amount of pulls the entire Void Spire and Dream Rift did to defeat. Blizzard had this 4 days, and they cooked. They really, really cooked, and they dialed it in with a very low margin of error for what the players could do in order to defeat this thing, and it was a monster, an absolute monster. But interestingly enough, Liquid did their splits, did some Mythic Bellerin, had a look at it, went to bed. Echo comes in, does 3 splits, and by lunchtime, they're done. Because of the gearing thing. And they're on Mythic Bellerin. They're already in there. And we get the notifications like, nope, that's it. Splits are done. There's no more to do. This is shocking. This is genuinely shocking in the Race to World First scenario. So we were like, oh, okay. This is interesting. And suddenly the story started to change of what this thing was. It just turned out that Bellerin was crazy hard. crazy, crazy hard. Echo spent most of the day working on positioning things. It was very complex and very it became a mathematical puzzle because it became very clear that Mythic Bellerin, which is a bird, that when you kill the bird and then the egg spawns, the egg is the real boss HP, and it turned out very clearly you had to kill this egg in 2 turns because it'll just reset. If you don't kill the egg, the bird comes back, you kill it again, the egg respawns with the health remaining, and when the egg eventually dies, that's when the fight is over. Usually you'd expect to do this in 3 turns, 3 rotations. That was not going to happen. The fight was too hard for that. It was going to be 2, and that is an enormous amount of damage. So Echo worked a lot on strategizing the bird phase, which was the much harder phase, to actually reach the eggs. It became so difficult to reach the eggs. And they got really good at it. Then they had to go to bed. Liquid came in. saw some of the positioning stuff, and then added in very cleverly some classes that, specifically the Windwalker, that could do a monstrous amount of damage to this egg in this very tight window. You had 30 to 40 seconds to DPS this egg per turn, and classes that just blitz that period of time and nail it while meeting all the buff requirements that the raids do, and took down Bellerin, which was phenomenal. They did so much damage. It was crazy.
Keep going.
Watch the ring from that side. Watch the ring from that
Fucking
side.
shit on this boss. Come on.
Let's go.
Come on. Yeah.
Let's go.
Woo. Right before dinner.
The shield.
Good shit, boys.
Holy. That was insane, boys.
Gaining access to Mythic Bellerin, the final fight. I'm not going to dwell too much on this, because I now know most of you by this point followed along with it. But very quickly, this race, everything, the Heroic Week, and that miserable Void Spire Chimeras Week was very quickly forgotten. I think it's worth remembering that is how it went, because of what we're about to talk about in a second. But Mythic Bellerin turned into one of the most hype things ever. So good. Not only did Liquid find a secret phase that we didn't know existed, there was rumblings of it, spells were found during data mining, but it had been dismissed because the fight was so hard. But Blizzard's created, arguably, but I think correctly, the hardest boss ever made in the game, with so little margin for error. You can imagine, like, when they design a fight, it's like, this should be doable with 10% margin of error, right? Either you kill it very early if you play perfectly, but if you have deaths and things creating errors, you can still overcome it somewhat. This thing basically had no wiggle room at all for these guys who were almost biscued to do this fight. An absolute monster. A real beauty. Absolutely tremendous. And Liquid essentially won it twice. That's how good they were playing, is they not only entered the secret phase first, but they also killed the boss first, as Echo just could not clutch it out. For whatever reason, that'll be on Echo to sort out, but they had plenty of advantages. If you're looking for my opinion on it, it's like they had a lot of advantages in this raid that just never materialized into the final product. It was a bummer, obviously, but Liquid was just so good. So good, and managed to capitalize on it. But the interesting thing for me was both guilds went through 2 days of when do we go to bed, because we didn't know the secret phase existed, right? So on the night when phase 3, which leads to the secret phase, looked like it was going to die, Echo decided to push long. They went deep till like 1 a.m. And then Liquid got it.
Everything, immunities.
Immunities in 3, 2, 1, now.
Let's fucking go.
Please. Come on. Yes! Wait!
No.
This cannot be. Come on. Let's fucking go. Let's fucking go.
Please,
Come on.
No.
This cannot be. This cannot be. Secret phase. No.
There's just no way. No.
There's a bubble! Where's the achievement? Wait, what happened?
No way!
Is there a secret phase? Oh my god!
No way! There's a casting reintegration!
Wait, what happens?
Let's go! What is going on?
Did they win?
Phase?
What happened?
What is happening? What the fuck? What do you fucking mean, re-intermission? What?
And then saw there's a secret phase. So it was immediately, Echo has to go to bed and hope the secret phase is very hard. Often, secret phases are quite easy, and you can figure them out pretty quickly. The only saving grace for Echo was that it's really hard to get there. It's very, very hard to get there. So Echo has to make that choice. Like, we have to go to bed. We've played 17 hours. We need to sleep. It might be dead when we wake up, which is a horrible feeling during the race. They get up. It's not dead. Now Liquid's in that position. We need to go to bed. They've got the secret phase down to, I think it was 40% or maybe even 20%, but they have to go to bed. They're tired. Their players are wiped out. They're exhausted, and they have to believe Echo's going to kill it, right? So they're in that position then. Echo plays through the day, doesn't manage to get it, gets very low, like 10%. 10% left on the boss. You have to believe this is the end, but Liquid gets back up. They wake up, and they see it's still not dead. And now we're in that situation again, as it did push till gone midnight for 2 back-to-back days of like 17-hour gaming for both guilds. Absolutely extraordinary as Liquid brought it home and became, probably will be renowned for a while as the best Race to World first ever.
80 energy, last heaven and hell. It comes down to this. Can we keep all 20 alive? Do we have the damage check here? It's not over when the boss hits 100 energy. Remember, there's still that midnight cast. Do the damage, Liquid.
Just
one cast on the boss.
Resolve these stars. Don't leave the raid. Keldon. Liquid have done it. A phase 4. They thought that yesterday was kill day. They thought they were going to bed the losers with Echo claiming it. But they showed up today. They swapped to the Guardian Druid, and they have claimed world first for the 4th time in a row.
Wow.
So let's talk about, and I agree with the ending, obviously not the beginning. The beginning was very rough, but if this is so good, it makes people forget about the bad bit. All right. Should they do this again is my question, this staggered raid release. So a few things here. I think this is a more nuanced conversation. On the back of it, it seems like this worked out well, but at the sacrifice of having a miserable period of time at the very beginning, but the fact that March of Keldon was locked off did give Blizzard 4 free days to really dial in how they wanted these bosses to work at the back end, right? Bellerin and Lura were heavily modified based on what the guys had, what they were going to get, and what they had done with add-on tech. They had 4 free days to sit in the office and really dial it down, and that clearly paid off with one of the most tightly tuned raids ever. However, does that mean it was a good thing to stagger the raids? Well, we've also seen them do this in the past. Dimensius, the previous tier, was also tuned extremely well and was not far off the pull count. Allura went higher, for sure, because it had that extra little bit of time to cook in the oven. But Dimensius was not far off, with very little changes needed, with Blizzard absolutely nailing it in creating that one smooth race. I had several messages saying, thank God this happened because of Illyria. I was like, I'll be honest with you. I don't think we get March of Keldon without Illyria being as easy as Illyria was. One does not mean the other, right? It's not a case of Illyria was really easy, but they already had March of Keldon being super hard. That's not the case. Without Illyria being bad, or the Void Spire and Dream Rift, I should say. I shouldn't blame Illyria on her own. Without those raids being very easy for the Race to World First. Not for everybody else. I know some people get offended by that, but easy for the Race to World First. I hope you understand that context. We didn't get the March of Keldon that we actually got, which led to this phenomenal, exciting race. So is one way better than the other? I don't know. I really don't know. And I'm curious what everyone thinks, because it's not as easy as A or B. Because without the way it was at the start, we didn't get this, but we also had this miserable time earlier on before this actually happened, which is less fun for certainly fans of the race and for the players themselves. So anybody involved with the race, it was not a fun time at all. And although it did pay off very well, is it ideal compared to having this? I will say I imagine the community really likes the idea of split raids. Is different. I do as well. I like the idea of the raids being divided up. Because you get a different flavor. Some of my favorite raid times were having Black Temple and Hyjal and Cataclysm, where there was 3 raids to go out as well. You got a different flavor, a different environment, a little bit of a breather from being in the same rooms all the time, like we typically do with normal raids. I'm really torn on this. What I do know, though, is the reveal of that secret phase is something I've been championing with Blizzard directly for a really long time. There was a feeling, I think, for a while that Mythic raids, Mythic secret phases were a waste of time because nobody got to play them. So the devs put in all this time to create these sometimes fantastical extra phases or even entire bosses in the cases of Sinestra and Raden. But our players don't get to use it. Like, so few people do Mythic as it is, and so few people clear Mythic on top of that. Having these secret extras is kind of just a waste of development time that could be spent on something that everybody plays. I get that sort of mentality. However, given the scale and scope of the Race to World First at this point, right? I think it was hundreds of thousands of people were watching this happen live who were never, ever going to step foot into Mythic. Most of those viewers are not stepping foot into Mythic at all. It's just not part of their wheelhouse, but they enjoy WoW and they enjoy watching what's going on. For all those people who are never, ever going to see this stuff or fight this stuff and have no inclination to even want to do those things, they all got to experience it vicariously through the players. They were there as much as the players were. They might not have been the ones pressing keys, but for all intents and purposes, they were a part of that experience. And when I was talking to the Echo team, when they saw... in fact, Cruella was streaming as this happened, so hopefully she'll allow us to put a clip in here.
Hello.
Attends, quoi? Attends, quoi? Hein? 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 What? Il y a une phase secrète? What? This secret phase, guys! What? 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 What the fuck? Oh! 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 What? Oh my god!
The reaction at the Echo camp of, we lost. I was casting at the time, so I wasn't in the room. We lost, but this is also incredible as that reaction dawned on people, and that would have been shared globally. Now, obviously, you can't do it a lot. You can't expect the secret mythic phase. We probably won't see anything like this again till the last Titan at some point. At least an expansion down the line. I don't think so, otherwise it loses its flair. You know, you've got to be careful with these things. But all these moments combined created this wonderful experience, and I'm really interested to see what your take on it is. Ultimately, I walked away happy that we got a wonderful race, but I do know for a large portion of it, I was like, this is kind of grim, dude. This is kind of grim up until those last days, and I'm sure some of you felt the same. Is it the best Race to World First ever? As a package? No. As an ending? Yes.